Yes, it is. Mic test. It's not yet on. Oh, it's on. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's supposed to hide. Okay, just a minute. I need to hide the microphone. Oh. Okay. Inabidi. Wow, nimekimbia. Nahitaji. One.
So our dignitaries are walking in now. Could we be upstanding, please? Thank you. You may please be seated. Thank you. Mr. Claver Gatete, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Honorable Zwanele Nihonsu, Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development of the Republic of South Africa. Ambassador Joaili, Director of the Citizens and Diaspora Organizations of the African Union Commission. Honorable Ministers, representatives of the African Union member states, regional economic communities, vice chancellors, esteemed traditional leaders, development partners, land practitioners, representatives of the civil society and non-state actors, the private sector, academia, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I am Janet Edeme, and I head the Rural Development Division and also the Agriculture and Food Security Division at the African Union Commission headquarters here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for this opening session. The opening ceremony for the 6th edition of the Conference on Land Policy in Africa. Each Conference on Land Policy in Africa offers us a unique space to reflect on progress, reaffirm commitments, and collectively chart a transformative path for Africa's land governance agenda. This year's theme, Land Governance, Justice, and Reparations for Africans and Descendants of People of the African Diaspora, is both timely and profound. It invites us to confront the enduring legacies of dispossession and inequality while reimagining a future where land serves as a foundation for dignity, prosperity, and unity. By advancing just and inclusive land governance, we not only address historical injustices, but we ways for sustainable development, food security, and peace continents and beyond. Secure, equitable, and responsible land governance underpins inclusive growth, food and nutrition security, social cohesion, peace, and environmental stewardship. The conversations we open today will inform concrete actions across policy institutions and investments. Distinguished delegates, it's now my singular privilege to invite Mr. Claver Gatete, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, Honorable Minister Zwanele, the second name is very difficult to pronounce, but I will try. It's Nyontwe, Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development, Republic of South Africa, and this is a very, very important post for anywhere in Africa. Ambassador Amri Ajowaire, Director, Citizens and Diaspora Directorate, African Union Commission, distinguished traditional leaders, representatives of development partners, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to welcome you on behalf of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa of the Conference on Land Policy in Africa, convened under the compelling theme, Land Governance, Justice and Reparations for Africans and Descendants of the People of the Africa Diaspora. Today, our meeting is taking place here in this historic Africa Hall, the birthplace of the Organization of African Unity and a living symbol of our collective journey towards freedom and dignity. I wish to begin by expressing heartfelt appreciation to our partners, the African Union Commission and the Africa Development Bank, for their steadfast collaboration with ECA through the African Land Policy Center. I also thank all stakeholders here present, researchers, and policymakers whose dedication has made this biannual dialogue a platform for advancing evidence-based land governance across our continent. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we convene at a defining moment for our world. As we speak, the world is navigating converging storms, from economic uncertainty to climate upheavals and geopolitical realignments. Unfortunately, in Africa, a continent rich in land and resources that often bears the heaviest burden from rising debt, costs, climate-induced displacement, and persistent inequalities. How then can we build a just and prosperous Africa when the roots of historical injustice that have constrained the continent's development remain unresolved? It is in this context that our theme, which is perfectly aligned with the African Union's 2025 theme of the year on reparations, justice, and healing, finds it. Indeed, land governance, justice, and reparations are not questions of the past. They are imperatives for Africa's restoration of fairness in global systems. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, more than just geography, land represents sovereignty, identity, and security. It anchors livelihoods, underpins food systems, and defines belonging. Recognizing this, the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, and the Economic Commission for Africa created the Africa Land Policy Center to ensure that Africa's land and resources serve the people first. Through the Africa Land Policy Center, we have developed frameworks on women's land rights, responsible agricultural investment, and conflict-sensitive governance. Furthermore, we have trained institutions and harmonized land. However, despite this progress, substantial inequalities still remain. How can land and resources still leave so many without secure access or equitable benefit? The answer lies in the history. Centuries of enslavement, colonization, and dispossession reshaped our political economy and global position. The same extractive logic that once seized land now manifests its inequity, trade systems, inflated borrowing costs, and credit assessments that undervalue Africa's potential. Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral resources, 65% of the uncultivated arable land, and the youngest population on Earth. And yet it accounts for only a small fraction of global trade and contributes just 2% manufacturing output. These disparities are the enduring legacy of structural imbalances that continue to shape Africa's role in the global economy. It is not right that they still define who produces, who trades, and who benefits. Reparations, therefore, must go beyond acknowledgement of the past. They must transform the systems that perpetuate inequality today, and they must restore balance between resource wealth and shared prosperity. In this regard, Excellencies, allow me to highlight 5 recommendations for our collective reflection and action. First, we must reform the global financial and trading architecture. As we speak, illicit financial flows drain an estimated $88 billion US each year from Africa, while unfair credit ratings inflate borrowing costs and constrain access to long-term capital. Additionally, the continent receives less than 3% of global climate finance and faces trade terms and global rules that still favor exporters of raw materials, producers of value-added goods. A just order must include fairer credit assessments, debt for development instruments, and stronger African financial institutions. Justice in this regard will begin when finance becomes fair. Second, we must strengthen land governance and tenure security, particularly for women, youth, and smallholder farmers. Transparent and inclusive systems are the bedrock of social stability and growth. Without secure land rights, there can be no food security, no peace, and certainly no lasting development. Third, we must leverage the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to turn resource wealth into regional value chains. With a combined GDP of approximately 3.4 trillion US dollars, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area offers a continental market scale that presents the opportunity to refine and trade African goods. Why should Africa export raw materials only to import finished goods, products? But when our land powers our industries will in turn power our people. Fourth, we must mobilize African diaspora as co-architects of transformation. The diaspora is not a part of Africa. It is a vital extension of it. Its capital, knowledge, and advocacy connect Africa to global innovation. In this regard, we must create structured mechanisms to channel these resources toward Africa's industrial and digital ambitions. Invest in technology, climate resilience, and youth empowerment. Digital tools can modernize land administration, climate-smart agriculture, and sustain ecosystems. And our youth can drive revolutions that define Africa's future. Excellencies, the Economic Commission for Africa remains unwavering in its support for these priorities. Together with the African Union, Africa Development Bank, and the Africa Land Policy Center, ECA continues to help countries strengthen land governance, data systems, and regional cooperation. Our shared mission is to transform the dialogue on reparations into a concrete framework for restoration, resilience, and renewal. And as we meet here in Africa Hall, where Africa's founders first declared the unity of purpose, let us renew that spirit of conviction and hope. Together we can reclaim not only what was lost, but also build what must last. Welcome once again. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your welcome remarks. And thank you as well for the 5 highlights that you provided for us in your statements. You looked at issues around reforming the global financial architecture and how that would improve in terms of strengthening our land governance and tenure security for our citizens, particularly the women, and leveraging on the African Union Continental Free Trade Area, and most importantly, mobilizing our African diaspora. Thank you very much, Excellency. With this, it's my singular honor and privilege to invite my colleague from the African Union Commission, Ambassador Amir Al-Jawali, the Director of the Citizens and Diaspora Organizations Directorate at the AU Commission, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and Excellencies, distinguished ministers, distinguished delegates of the African Union member states, vice chancellors, esteemed traditional leaders, representatives of development partners, land practitioners, and of course, all protocol observed. I would like to recognize, first of all, our host, His Excellency, Mr. Claver Gatete, UN Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. I'd like to recognize our keynote speaker, Honorable, I will give it a try this time. Ms. Wanele Nyahunso, Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development of South Africa. Our Master of Ceremonies, of course, my dear colleague, Dr. Janet Edemi, Head of Rural Development Division, and Madam Silke, Councillor for Food and Agriculture, Republic of Germany. So on behalf of the African Union Commission, it is a profound honor to welcome you to the 6th Conference on Land Policy in Africa, convened jointly by the African Union Commission, of which I have the honor to represent the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the African Land Policy Center. So since its inception, the CLPA has become an enduring intellectual and policy platform, a space where Africa convenes not merely to discuss land, but to interrogate how justice, sovereignty, and sustainability intersect on this most fundamental of resources. This conference, its enduring, reflects a truth we can no longer overlook, which is land governance in Africa is not simply a technical matter, it is the very architecture of social justice, economic transformation, and peace. The theme of this year's conference, Land, Governance, Justice, and Reparations for Africans and Descendants of People and the African Diaspora, resonates very well. In fact, it echoes totally the African Union's theme of the year for 2025, which is Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations. And I'm very honored that the Citizen and Diaspora Directorate is actually the AU-wide system focal point for this theme. It is a theme that is owned by every organ, institution, and office of the African Union, and we are honored to be the coordinator. Together, these themes, the theme of the conference and the theme of the year for the African Union, compel us to confront historical and contemporary inequities that continue to shape the African condition and to commit to a future defined not by grievance, but by redress and renewal. This theme of the year challenges us to reimagine justice beyond the confines of legal restitution towards a broader and more emancipatory vision of justice as restoration. It reminds us of the importance of the restoration of agency, dignity, and the right of Africans to define their own developmental destiny. So distinguished delegates and ladies and gentlemen, the African Union leadership in this space has committed to dialogues and ensuring that this theme is implemented. As we look ahead, the AU is assertive that the work of justice and reparations must be situated within Africa's contemporary development agenda, not as a historical afterthought, but as a pillar for sustainable transformation. In this regard, land remains both a symbol and an instrument of justice. Across the continent, struggles over land mirror deeper struggles over recognition, belonging, and the equitable distribution of opportunity. Therefore, the governance of land is inseparable from the development itself. To address inequity in access to land is also to address inequity in access to power, prosperity, and participation, and hence development as a whole. As we reflect on the deliberations that will unfold over the coming days, we are reminded that this conference serves as more than a convening of experts. It is an affirmation of Africa's commitment to reimagine the nexus between knowledge, policy, and practice, and to ensure that our reforms are grounded in evidence, guided by equity, and propelled by shared purpose. The conference is a testament to the enduring that underpins the AU Declaration on Land Issues and Challenges in Africa, and to the vision of Agenda 2063, which stipulates equitable access to land as a foundational of the Africa we want. Once again, in this context of the year's theme, the challenge is clear: to translate reparative justice into institutional reform, to turn historical reflection into forward-looking governance, and to transform land from a site of exclusion into a catalyst for inclusion, prosperity, and peace. The African Union, which I have the most honor to represent today, remains steadfast in its support to member states and partners in this endeavor. So allow me to update you on the progress that we have made thus far in furthering the theme of the year. 1, mandate. The African Union heads of states and government in their summit have just in one summit have adopted 4 that reinforce the issue of justice and reparations. Decision 903 on the implementation of Decision 884, which is the designation of the theme of the year, but also Decision 903, 913 on the convening of the Pan-African Congress in Lomé, Togo from April. Decision 934 on the classification of the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, genocide against the African people as crimes against humanity. These are all interrelated decisions that give us a very strong mandate, a solid base on which we can proceed further. This mandate did not come from a vacuum. It came all the way from the Organization of African Unity in 1993. The Pan-African Conference on Reparations was held in Abuja. It resulted in the Abuja Proclamation on Reparations. What does that proclamation say? It says it very clearly, that the international community have to recognize that there is a moral debt owed to African people, and it is about time for that debt to be repaid. The African leaders in these decisions, including 884, have clearly identified the issues that are before us. They did not have a narrow look, they had a global look. They identified reparations for Africa is to address inequities in global systems. They called on the very same Decision 884 for the reform of the international financial and trade architecture and the United Nations Security Council. They recognized in that very same decision and resolution that the consequences of the transatlantic enslavement, colonialism, and apartheid have repercussions for today. They have repercussions on the debt burden, on the illicit financial flows, even on climate justice and loss and damage. They reaffirmed that accountability and reparations are fundamental, and hence they also recognized the need to combat systemic racism. They identified clear outcomes for us, they identified clear outputs for us, but they also put forward mechanisms. 2 mechanisms will convene in Addis Ababa from December 15th to December 19th. The African Union, the very first African Union Committee on Reparations, and the very first African Union group of legal experts on reparations. And being at this UN headquarters, may I, through you, Honorable Kleber, invite a rapporteur of this conference to make a presentation before those 2 mechanisms, because these are the very 2 mechanisms that are mandated and that are tasked to develop a common African Union position on reparations, including a program of action. The leaders did not ask us to do this on our own, they asked us to do this in partnership. One of the main partnerships that they identified for us is partnership with the Caribbean community. And for that reason, on September 7th in Addis Ababa, the very first in-person summit between African leaders and CARICOM leaders met, and they adopted the Addis Ababa Declaration on Reparatory Justice. But this partnership is not alone. They asked us also to, of course, to channel our thoughts and our ideas and our demands through the United Nations. And I can, I think, very proudly also announce that for the very first time, the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent will convene in Addis Ababa at the premise of the African Union, its 5th session in April of 2026. So this is an ongoing journey. We know that it's a theme of the year, but the ministers in Malabo, the African Union Council of Ministers, Executive Council of Ministers, recommended to the leaders that it becomes the theme of the decade. So what we are building now is the base, it's a solid base for a journey that will endure and its results. So as we open the 6th conference on land policy in Africa, let us commit ourselves to advancing the moral and practical work of justice, justice that repairs, that restores, that reclaims Africa's agency in shaping its own narrative. Let us reaffirm that Africa's path to justice is inseparable from its path to sustainable development, are grounded in the good governance of land, the dignity of people, and the promise of its future. So may our deliberations over the upcoming few days generate the insight, the partnership, and the resolve to carry this vision forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you for laying out the roadmap, the highlights, and the implementation of the AU theme of the year over the next 10 years. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, just before I invite the Minister to present us with his opening statement and officially open the conference, I would like to invite the artist who is going to give us a performance on the spoken word. Can I have the artist come down?
Once, I was a girl in history class, learning about the benefits of colonization, wondering how we, who had lost so much, who had been subjected to slavery and colonization, were forced to learn that there was benefit to us as a good idea. That every African child must at least 6 benefits of colonization in order to pass history class. And as they spoke of introduction of Western education, I wondered, are the generations of knowledge that had been passed down to grandchild, generation to generation, lost after years of being stored in our tongues? As they spoke of cash crops, I longed for a time when my people were self-sufficient, when they had enough to feed themselves and the travelers passing through their land. As my tongue was only forced to train in the English language in the school system, my heart longed for the freedom of my mother's tongue, for the child who did not have to perform to be received, to be accepted. As they spoke, I wondered, what had we lost? But now, I know what it was in those history classes. It was the West burying their head in the sand, refusing to accept what they had done to Africa. It was the West convincing themselves it was not all bad. Surely, in all those years, we must have done something good. We must have left something good in African soul. And so, child of African descent is taught they left something good. And when you remember, you must remember these two. They left something good. And when you remember, you must remember these two. But our memory refuses to be programmed. Our ancestors' blood calls us from the soil. Remember, it says, remember, child, that the soil still bleeds where the borders were drawn. The soil still bleeds where the borders were drawn. Our rivers and oceans still answer to names that do not belong to them. The sea, my child, it still weeps our brothers and sisters stolen from our land, echoing the songs they sang, songs of a land to which they would not return. My ancestors whisper, speak, child, speak boldly. Stand with truth rooted in memory. This land that is both cradle and grave will only begin to heal when justice reckons with the harrowing truth. And so we gather, scholars, dreamers, leaders, poets. We gather as witnesses. We bring our hopes, our papers, our data, but also our ghosts, also our questions. What does it mean to repair? When you owe a debt in blood, that which you cannot repay, how do you begin to make amends? O children of the land, you who have gathered, what shall you demand? Will you dare to speak without biting your tongues? Will you dare to name what was broken? Will we dare to look beneath these old wounds, rotting and reeking from years of neglect? Because the truth is, we have been here before, beneath new flags and old wounds. Here before, but this time, may we be the ancestors' echoing return. May we be the drum awakening. May we reclaim our voice in art, in policy, in land reforms. May we reclaim our voices to rebuild what has always been. The truth is, we have been here before. But this time, may we stay long enough for the land to forgive us. This time, may we stay long enough for the land to heal. Kaimwega, mamokeri madairo, mamokeri magangana mandairo, gayore tinge hotonedo, menenyaga, pakohoya, yokanana.
Thank you so much. From our artist who has given us the spoken word, can we give her another round of applause? Thank you very much. 6 benefits of colonization. Very interesting. And she said we can only begin to heal when justice is done. And may we stay long enough for the land to heal. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my singular honor now to invite Honorable Zwanali Nihonso, the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development of the Republic of South Africa, to deliver his opening speech and also officially open the conference. Honorable Minister. Round of applause.
Program Director, Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, if there are any, Commissioners, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. We are honored to address this esteemed gathering of leaders, scholars, and experts from the African continent and beyond. We have assembled here in Addis Ababa to deliberate upon and seek lasting solutions to one of the most important topics and phenomena of our time. In South Africa, the vision for our national program of land reform and rural development, which is expressed in our democratic post-apartheid constitution, fully aligns with Agenda 2063. As a blueprint for Africa's transformation, Agenda 2063 calls for inclusive growth, sustainable development, and governance that is grounded in knowledge, innovation, and data. Land is the foundation of food security, social and economic development, and if managed equitably for the benefit of all citizens, it is the bedrock for social and political stability. Through our land reform programs, we are also establishing the basis for addressing the scourges of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and underdevelopment. Land reform also has a major contribution to make in promoting economic growth and creation of generational wealth for numerous families beyond providing the basis for sustainable livelihoods. Our task is therefore not merely transfer soil and related physical factors through our land reform and rural development programs. We also have the responsibility to actively restore dignity and promote prosperity. Land thus transcends the material surface, what is significant social and spiritual value. The 1994 watershed democratic breakthrough in South Africa brought about a non-racial and democratic constitution that entrenched land reform in its provisions, which are contained in section 25.5, 25.6, and 25.7. Our constitution thus sets a foundation that compels our state to introduce legislation and policies to address and bring redress for colonial and apartheid, such as land dispossession and denial of land rights to the majority of citizens. It further compels the state to avail resources that will ensure that previously oppressed citizens gain equitable access to land and security of tenure. Our legislation in the area of land reform provides for the designation and acquisition of land for redistribution purposes and for the settlement of persons on it. Additionally, the legislation provides for settlement planning, development, improvement, and disposal of property, as well as the provision of financial and other forms of assistance for land reform purposes. Similarly, in the sphere of tenure reform, we have legislation that provides for measures through state assistance whose main aims include facilitating long-term security of land tenure and acquisition of land for labor tenants, other farm dwellers, and occupiers. This legislation also regulates the conditions of residence for such citizens on designated pieces of land. Other pieces of tenure legislation provide for the transfer of land to municipalities and other legal entities, and for the removal of restrictions on alienation of land, and informal land tenure rights to ownership. Labor tenancy is a unique phenomenon in South Africa where Africans continue to reside on white-owned land after the dispossession process had been completed, were retained on relatively small patches of land on the farms on new landowners in exchange for providing labor services. In order to accelerate land reform and to address certain gaps that have been identified during the implementation processes, our department is currently key pieces of legislation. The first of these is the Equitable Access to Land Bill, whose main aim is to achieve the long-standing requirement that is provided for in terms of section 25, subsection 5 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, relating to equitable access to land. The second is the Communal Land Tenure and Administration Bill, which is being developed in compliance with the provisions of section 25, subsection 6 of the Constitution, with the aim of providing security of tenure to the approximately 16.5 million inhabitants of communal and adjacent areas. Since 1994, our department has overseen the redistribution of 5.9 million hectares of land. Our beneficiary selection and land allocation policy, which is currently under implementation, prioritizes vulnerable groups such as women, people living with disability, and the youth. During the period between 2019 and 2025, a total of 238 farms amounting to 362,000 hectares were allocated to various beneficiaries in terms of proactive land acquisition strategy. Plus, the delivery tenure reform program has seen mixed results, as approximately 50% of the labor tenant claims have been settled for tenure purposes through the implementation of legislation called the Extension of Security of Tenure Act and the Land Reform. With the Land Reform Act, that's labor tenants. With regard to urban tenure, we have made amendments to legislation called the Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights (ULTRA) in order to provide, among others, for the conversion of land tenure rights in these areas, especially townships, the ownership and for development and support on such land parcels. Also, that were denied freehold tenure during the apartheid systems are having their tenure rights converted through the implementation of this legislation. Program Director, Your Excellencies, one of our flagship programs, the restitution program, is aimed at providing restitution in respect of land rights of and communities dispossessed of such rights after 19 June 1913, as a result of past racially discriminatory laws and practices. The relevant legislation, the Restitution of Land Rights Act 22 of 1994, as amended, establishes the Commission on Restitution of Land Rights, whose main aim function are to investigate and resolve claims primarily through the negotiation and mediation. In those cases where a claim cannot be resolved through negotiation or mediation, it is referred to the Land Claims Court for adjudication. Since the inception of the restitution program in 1994, a total of 83,614 land claims have been settled, which amounts to approximately 80% of the total number of valid claims that have been finalized. The budget allocated for the settlement of claims is normally 50 basis between the land restoration and financial compensation. Additional funding has been allocated to beneficiaries of land restitution for the purposes of providing them with development support. Program Director, Your Excellencies, as a country and as a department, are also in the fortunate position of having a strong geospatial information function that provides the necessary foundation for supporting the various aspects of our land reform program. This function also serves all public and private institutions in our country with regard to spatial planning, land use, and surveying activities. It enables us to have a better informed understanding of where communities live, how land is used, and how resources can be managed responsibly. The United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information, more than a decade, led the development of a coordinated global system for governing geospatial data. South Africa is currently serves as co-chair of the committee, representing the African continent, with the other co-chairs being Saudi Arabia and the United States of America. Through this position, Africa contributes directly to shaping global policies and standards that ensure that spatial information supports sustainable development. During the 9th session of United Nations GGIM Africa held in Cape Town in 2020, member states recommended that South Africa should spearhead the continental process of integrating geospatial governance into the core work of the African Union. That recommendation was endorsed at the 10th session convened here in Addis Ababa in 2024, thus confirming a united continental mandate for South Africa to lead this effort. We reaffirm our country's readiness to fulfill this responsibility, which we view as both a privilege and a Pan-African duty. Our goal in this area is to translate that mandate into action, working with the African Union Commission, AUDA, NEPAD, and the regional economic communities to ensure that geospatial governance becomes a formal and enduring component of the AU and the continent's institutional architecture for evidence-based planning, data governance, and service delivery. In South Africa, the modernization of land administration system is advancing steadily. The electronic deeds registration system, the National Spatial Data Observatory,
and the integrated development sector strategy reflect our national commitment to transparency, efficiency, and innovation in land governance. These initiatives integrate cadastral, spatial, and socio-economic data and reinforce coordination under our country's district development model, which promotes integrated planning across all spheres of government. They also embody the same principles that underpin integrated geospatial information framework and the framework of effective land administration, which are alignment into operability and evidence-based decision-making. This institutional architecture will also assist United African Union member states in building the spatial infrastructure that underpin agriculture, development, environmental management, climate resilience, and the strengthening of tenure reform and recognition of communal and customary rights. Having highlighted the above issues, we must boldly accept that we still have a considerable amount to do in the area of limited functional areas, and that our achievements so far have been modest. We therefore have the important task of addressing challenges and blind spots seriously and urgently. The first of these is the need to recalibrate our programs to ensure that they truly become both pro-poor and also promote support for emergent farmers and those who need land for urban-based commercial and economic undertakings on a needs-based and equitable manner. The second area that we need to focus upon is the mobilization of necessary resources. While we recognize the fact that land and agrarian reform function in a global and national constrained fiscal environment, this cannot be an excuse for sitting back and doing nothing about it. Otherwise, we should brace ourselves for a protracted period during which realization of the promise of our constitutions will be postponed indefinitely, and the widespread poverty that afflicts the masses of our people will continue unabated. We therefore cannot overemphasize the imperative of providing adequate investment in holistic land development funding. Thus, in addition to the funds that we receive from the national budget, we must work hard in the area of promoting sustainable partnerships at the national and multilateral levels. We must thus actively and creatively explore additional sources of funding for land reform to supplement what is available in the national fiscus. Another area in which improvements are required in our country is that, in addition to finalizing the land reform bill currently being developed, we must expeditiously formulate and implement new policies on land support packages, and update our policies on beneficiary selection and land allocation. We need to be firm and sure-footed in ensuring that what becomes an integral aspect of all our land reform programs and projects. The enhancement of pre- and post-settlement support for beneficiaries of all our land reform programs is a sine qua non for the successful execution of our national mandate in this crucial area. We cannot simply ignore the critique that is often made, which highlights the collapse of a significant number of our projects as emanating from the fact that in many instances, the beneficiaries of land transfer do not receive the necessary support. We also need to strengthen the links that our land reform initiatives can have with rural development, which is a multi-sectoral, includes the provision of basic needs, rural industrialization, infrastructure provision, and the promotion of opportunities for entrepreneurship. This is one of the most potent areas, alongside agrarian reform, where land reform can contribute immensely and significantly towards transforming the lives and livelihoods of our people for the better. We must also resolve the issue of land tenure and administration, which we have alluded to, decisively and with increased speed. By finalizing the drafting of communal land tenure and administration bill, our country needs clarity and finality with regard to key issues such as the roles of various stakeholders on communal land, institutional mechanisms and structures that should anchor the management of land rights and the administration of the requisite process. Most importantly, resolving these challenges will unlock development opportunities in the communal areas. Another challenge that we face is to translate our land reform program beyond simply allocating land and hectares into dynamic agrarian reform that plays in the growth of our economy and development in general. We also need to foster stronger linkages between land reform and urban development processes, especially in the area of housing and defeating the legacy of spatial apartheid, which relegated the Black majority to living in social spaces that are far removed from the centers of commercial and industrial activities, and therefore from employment opportunities and decent lives. We must also build a compelling case as well as institutional capacity for the demand of reparations. We are very encouraged by the fact that the subject of reparations has increasingly become a major focal point debates and efforts around land and development in Africa and the diaspora. Reparation is a process of self-repair, healing, and receiving compensation. That is restorative justice caused by former colonizers and oppressors. Land dispossession is a clear example of such excesses. And we cannot evade the reality that those who viciously took land away from our indigenous peoples have a responsibility to atone and pay for such excesses. The first international decade for people of African descent, 2015 to 2024, must serve as a mirror. Without reparatory justice, the decade of 2025 to 2034 will continue to be marked by African stagnation. Reparations should talk to the material factors of land and economy. We must take note that the primary act of national reparation is the comprehensive restoration of land. It is important that we take a lead from the Caribbean nations and their 9 action points. Through the African Union Commission, we must to seek financial compensation for land dispossession from the beneficiaries of our possession. We must expedite mechanisms that ensure economic sovereignty for all who systematically denied it. Justice in South Africa demands the return of the land in financial compensation to fund that land return. We thus also have the task of reimagining institutions such as the Commission on Restitution of Land Rights so that their work is aligned with the direction towards reparations in the area of embedding psychological principles and land reform, psychosocial principles. This is not so-called soft issue, as indeed a mindset change for our beneficiaries should be an integral part of our programs, not to overcome past trauma and to mitigate conflicts. In conclusion, we would like to reiterate the points that we made at the roundtable session earlier during this conference. If we need to work together with our universities, research institutes, and other multilateral institutions around the development of unique financing models. Other areas of collaboration include the development of training and capacity building, policy research, and data sharing models. Must also continue to provide and to strengthen the forums that constant debate and engagement, such as this conference. While we welcome constructive criticism from experts and academic researchers, we also call upon them to continue making positive suggestions, contributions, and commentaries on policy drafts and legislative drafting efforts. As the great OCGFO, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, once said, we must unite now or perish. Divided, Africa is weak. United, it could become one of the greatest forces for good in the world. It to join our strength, taking sustenance from our diversity, honoring our rich and varied traditions and culture, but acting together for protection and benefit for us all. We owe such unity of action to all the citizens of our countries who look up upon us to provide leadership in resolving the challenges that they face, which pivot primarily around issues of land. I wish you all a productive and successful conference, and I now declare this conference officially open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And thank you for sharing with us some of the legislations that the Republic of South Africa is putting in place to address land access inequalities, including the use of innovative technologies in the land reform process, and also identify some potential areas where we can further collaborate with you going forward in those reform processes. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the formal opening session of our conference. I would like to thank all the speakers for their leadership, for their participation, and also for sharing their thoughts and their visions with us in terms of going forward. So thank you very much. The opening session now stands adjourned. Could we be on our feet? Can we rise to our feet while our dignitaries are escorted out of the room? Thank you very much. A round of applause for them, please. Thank you.